The president got mad about an ad. Canada wants to insert itself and create a new precedent that you're going to participate in our electoral politics through advertising targeting the president of the United States and his policies. I would suggest that you seriously consider whether that is the best way to try to achieve your objectives in the United States of America.
Canada just pulled off something extraordinary, and Washington accidentally admitted it. In a moment that stunned political observers, U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra revealed that Canada had struck directly at Donald Trump's political weak spot. A single advertising campaign from Ontario rattled Trump deeply enough that his own ambassador stepped in front of cameras and told Canada, almost pleadingly, "Don't ever do that again." This wasn't a diplomatic warning. It was a confession, and it tells us everything about where the power actually lies in today's Canada-US standoff.
The scene was the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Conference, where Hoekstra addressed questions about the ongoing breakdown in Canada-US trade talks. The relationship has already been frayed by months of tariff escalation. President Donald Trump, now in his second term, has doubled down on his America First economic playbook. He has used emergency tariff powers to impose sweeping 25% duties on most Canadian goods and a 10% tariff on Canadian energy. These moves have strained supply chains, pushed up prices, and forced Canadian industries into defensive mode. Prime Minister Mark Carney, newly elected at the start of 2025, has responded strategically. He launched a $38.9 billion counter-tariff package, expanded export ties toward Asia, and framed the current era as Canada's chance to break free from economic overdependence on the United States. But the conversation shifted dramatically when Hoekstra was asked if stalled trade talks could resume. Instead of offering reassurance or a diplomatic reset, he lashed out at Ontario's decision to run anti-tariff ads in U.S. states. The ads highlighted how Trump's tariffs were hurting American workers and raising consumer prices. Hoekstra insisted this had never happened before in the history of the United States. He warned Canada not to repeat it. And that is when the panel discussion that followed revealed the truth. Canada had hit Trump exactly where he is the most vulnerable, in front of his own voters.
When a U.S. ambassador tells Canada to stop doing something and says it twice, it means Canada found leverage. Hoekstra could have brushed off the ads as inconsequential. Instead, he treated them like an act of war. His warning wasn't about election integrity or diplomatic norms. It was about fear. Fear that Canada had tapped into Trump's political insecurity. Analysts on CBC News put it plainly. The moment you take your case directly to Republican voters, you hit Trump's weak spot. That line says everything. Trump can shrug off diplomatic protests. He can ignore closed-door complaints, but he cannot ignore the voters who hold his political future in their hands. By bypassing Washington and talking directly to the American people, Canada disrupted his carefully controlled narrative. Hoekstra's outrage shows that Trump wasn't just annoyed, he felt threatened.
You did that, you've got not only Trump, but you've got his spokespeople in other countries saying, don't ever do that again. And that, to me, suggests a weak spot within MAGA, right. And another reason why the ads were good, because he doesn't also accept weakness.
For decades, Canada avoided confronting the United States publicly, even during moments of intense disagreement. Ottawa traditionally preferred quiet negotiations, back-channel diplomacy, and deliberately low-profile pushback. But this time, Canada chose visibility. Ontario's ads didn't whisper, they shouted. They told American workers that Trump's tariffs were destroying their jobs, raising their costs, and hurting their farms and factories. The U.S. could live with Canada complaining to diplomats. What it could not tolerate was Canada going over its head and speaking directly to American voters. Ottawa sent a message. Canada isn't a 51st state. Canada isn't afraid. Canada is willing to fight where it counts. Hoekstra's reaction revealed the scale of that impact. He behaved less like a diplomat and more like someone caught off guard, frustrated, and scrambling to contain political damage. It was not the response of a confident superpower. It was the response of a government that realized Canada had found a pressure point.
Hoekstra also claimed that Canada should aim to join the lowest tariff bucket, pointing to the 10% tariff baseline in the recent US-UK trade arrangement. He presented this as the best Canada could hope for. But experts on the panel immediately clarified that this was not a prize, it was a trap. Even the UK is unhappy with its deal, and several countries that signed early agreements with Washington have publicly expressed regret. A 10% tariff may sound modest, but it excludes critical sectors like steel, aluminum, autos, and lumber, the very industries that shape Canada's economic identity. This is why Carney's government is refusing to rush. Ottawa is waiting for the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling on Trump's tariff powers, waiting to see how Congress reacts, and waiting to determine whether Trump's policies can withstand pressure from his own voters and business leaders. Canada has no reason to sign a deal on Trump's timeline. The longer Canada waits, the more leverage it gains.
Observers noted that Hoekstra did not speak like a calm diplomat representing a stable administration. Instead, he sounded irritated and emotional. Analysts compared him to the cranky uncle, the opposite of what the U.S. usually sends to Ottawa. During previous diplomatic tensions, including the lead-up to the Iraq War under George W. Bush, ambassadors never displayed this level of frustration publicly. So why now? Why this tone? Why this imbalance? Because this time, the United States is under pressure. Trump's tariff war has raised consumer prices, rattled markets, upset farmers, and sparked internal Republican backlash. Canada's decision to expose these weaknesses through targeted ads magnified that internal pressure. Hoekstra's frustration is a sign not of strength, but of strain. As one analyst said during the panel, Trump respects strength, he doesn't respect weakness. Canada finally displayed strength, and Washington reacted exactly as you'd expect when confronted with something it doesn't control.
The Canada of today is not the Canada of a decade ago. Under Mark Carney's leadership, Canada has developed a clearer, more strategic foreign policy, one defined by independence, diversification, and self-confidence. Carney has framed the current moment as the end of an era of quiet dependence on American markets. Instead of simply pleading for tariff relief, Canada is expanding its economic relationships in Asia, deepening ties with South Korea and Japan, and positioning itself as a clean energy superpower. Hoekstra's reaction signals that this shift is being noticed. Washington realizes Canada is no longer playing a supporting role. And Trump's team knows that Canada has discovered a new tool, one that hits them exactly where it hurts most.
Pete Hoekstra didn't mean to reveal anything, but he revealed more than any official briefing or press conference could. He confirmed that Canada has leverage over Trump. He confirmed the targeted political messaging worked. And he confirmed that Washington is nervous about Canada using that strategy again. The question now is simple. Will Canada continue to press that weak spot, or will it back away just when the strategy is beginning to reshape the dynamic between Ottawa and Washington? Canada now knows where the pressure point is, and the world is watching to see whether it chooses to apply that pressure again.
As Prime Minister, my number one focus is to put Canadians back in control by building here at home and building new partnerships abroad, so that we're not reliant on the United States.
I think that Canada is starting to realize that overall we made a mistake in putting ourselves in lockstep with the Americans. You put all your eggs in one basket and then you have a Trump who just decides to throw the basket on the floor, then you're in trouble. And that's where we are right now.
In Gyeongju, South Korea, as cameras flashed across the APEC summit, something subtle but historic unfolded. Canada was no longer standing in the background of great power diplomacy. Its place among Asia's economic leaders had been earned. For years, Canadian delegations attended these forums as quiet observers, often overshadowed by larger economies. But this time, the tone was different. Behind that shift is a decade of patient work, building trust, strengthening regional links, and proving reliability in a world where those qualities are becoming rare. When Prime Minister Mark Carney met leaders from Malaysia, Singapore, and South Korea, it wasn't a courtesy call. It was the result of credibility accumulated through consistent policy, calm diplomacy, and the promise that Canada delivers on what it says. Across Asia's meeting halls, Canada was recognized not for its size, but for something more valuable, a reputation that travels farther than geography.
In today's fractured global economy, reputation has become a form of currency. When investors and governments look for partners who honor their word, reliability outweighs raw power. Canada's credibility has turned into its greatest export. Business councils across Southeast Asia describe Canada as a safe pair of hands, a country that keeps its markets open and its policies predictable even when others turn inward. The Canada-ASEAN Business Council, which has worked for more than 10 years to deepen economic ties, says that the groundwork is finally paying off. In 2024, trade between Canada and the Indo-Pacific region reached roughly $260 billion, according to Statistics Canada. Still far smaller than the $1.3 trillion Canada exchanges with the United States, but rising every quarter. What matters is the direction of travel. Canada is expanding where global growth is strongest and where long-term partnerships can be built on trust rather than turbulence. Reputation, once an abstract ideal, is now measurable in deals signed, meetings held, and markets opened.
Prime Minister Carney's whirlwind tour of Malaysia, Singapore, and South Korea symbolized that new reality. In Kuala Lumpur, he met with ASEAN and business leaders and described a world in transition, one where reliability counts more than rhetoric. His message resonated. For nations balancing between major powers, Canada offers a middle path: open trade without political strings, cooperation without confrontation. The numbers support this pivot. ASEAN, a bloc of 10 nations with more than 660 million people, is projected by the International Monetary Fund to be one of the fastest-growing regions through 2040. Over the past decade, Canadian firms have expanded quietly there in mining, agri-food, and clean energy projects that emphasize transparency and environmental standards. Carney's diplomacy is not about grandstanding. It is about planting flags of trust in economies that will define the next generation of global growth. Each handshake in Asia is a reminder that reputation built at home can open doors abroad.
It's our country, it's your future, and we are going to give it back to you.
Back in Ottawa, Carney's national address captured the deeper philosophy guiding this shift. "This is our country," he said. "It's your future." The speech wasn't about isolation, it was about self-reliance. For decades, Canada's prosperity was tied almost entirely to the United States. When the American economy stumbled, so did Canada's. Carney's goal is to break that dependency by strengthening what he calls the nation's economic sovereignty. His plan is straightforward but ambitious. Federal spending will be restrained to free resources for what truly drives productivity: homes, ports, electricity grids, and industrial corridors that move goods to the world. The government aims to rebuild domestic capacity in steel, aluminum, and technology manufacturing. Today, only about 40% of the steel purchased in Canada is produced domestically, according to the Canadian Steel Producers Association. Carney's target is to lift that share through Buy Canadian procurement rules and incentives for local producers. The principle is clear: a country that builds at home earns respect abroad. A nation confident in its own capacity can negotiate globally from strength, not dependence. Canada's growing presence in Asia reflects more than trade policy. It signals a transformation in national identity. The country once viewed itself mainly as America's reliable neighbor. Now it is becoming a reliable partner to the world.
Analysts point to the consistency of Canadian diplomacy, measured language, predictable regulation, and a willingness to mediate rather than polarize. Asian governments appreciate a partner that does not force them to choose sides. In places like Vietnam, the Philippines, and Indonesia, Canadian investment focuses on long-term industries, education, critical minerals, and infrastructure, areas that create shared value instead of dependency. The credibility of this approach rests heavily on leadership. Carney's background as a central banker and global economic advisor gives him unusual authority in financial and diplomatic circles. His command of detail, combined with a calm temperament, has made Canada's arguments carry weight far beyond its size. This influence wasn't inherited. It was earned through years of steady engagement, the same way Canada earned its seat at the Asian summit tables where decisions about the next global economy are being shaped.
Across the Pacific, Canada's reputation now carries a quiet strength. It is the strength of a nation that listens before it speaks, delivers before it promises, and builds before it boasts. The story unfolding is larger than a single trip or trade announcement. It is about a country redefining what leadership looks like in the 21st century. While others respond to uncertainty with fear, Canada responds with construction, with ports, power grids, and industries that connect its resources to global markets. The government's plan to double non-U.S. exports within the next decade may sound bold, but it fits the pattern of a nation betting on its own potential. This moment is not just economic, it is cultural and civic. Canadians are being asked to believe again in their collective capability, to see that national independence is not declared, it is demonstrated. Every policy that invests in Canadian workers, every partnership that builds mutual trust, adds another brick to that foundation. In this sense, Carney's message rings deeper than politics. The future of Canada will not be decided elsewhere. It will be built, piece by Canadians themselves. And as the world searches for steady hands in uncertain times, Canada's example is beginning to stand out, not because it is loud, but because it is consistent. Its place at the table has been earned. Its reputation continues to open doors, and its people are proving that a nation that believes in itself can shape not only its own destiny, but also a more balanced world around it.
The tariff and trade war with the U.S. is taking a tough turn for Canada's auto sector. Stellantis, the owner of Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge, and 11 other brands of vehicles, is investing $13 billion over the next 4 years to expand its manufacturing capacity in the U.S.
I'm not going to give them a penny because it was tied in to making sure Windsor and keep Brampton going. And we haven't given them a penny for Brampton yet. We gave them about $55 million out of the couple billion that the feds and I and the companies agreed. You know, it's disappointing.
In Ontario's political world, moments of raw emotion are rare. But when Premier Doug Ford declared that he would, quote, wouldn't give Stellantis a penny, it wasn't soundbite, it was a rupture. After months of quiet negotiations, the Premier's patience snapped when Stellantis confirmed that production of the Jeep Compass would leave Brampton, Ontario for Illinois. For the White House, it was a victory to celebrate. A global automaker coming home to create 5,000 American jobs. For Canada, it was a shock that cut deep. 3,000 positions gone overnight, billions in prior subsidies suddenly meaningless, and a painful reminder of how fragile cross-border manufacturing has become. Ford's words captured more than frustration. They reflected a growing realization. Washington's tariff war, once marketed as industrial revival, is starting to shake the very foundations of North American industry. To understand why Stellantis walked away, look at the ground beneath it. In early 2025, the Trump administration imposed new import duties on steel, aluminum, heavy trucks, and auto components ranging from 10 to 35%, citing national security. According to data from the U.S. Commerce Department, these tariffs pushed average input costs in the auto sector up by more than 12% by mid-year. For Canadian assembly plants, that change was crushing.
Ontario's auto corridor depends on thousands of cross-border parts shipments every day. Each new duty turned that corridor into a maze of paperwork and extra costs. Then came the words that changed the tone. At a Canada-US Relations Summit, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick declared that America should adopt an America First, Canada Second policy for the auto industry, a public confirmation that the White House intends to shift vehicle assembly south of the border. Canadian officials called it a massive threat to Ontario's manufacturing base, a signal that the era of shared production was ending. For companies like Stellantis, the message couldn't have been louder: move to America or pay the price. Stellantis saw the storm coming and moved before it hit.
We will not send a grain of critical minerals down there as long as we're under constant attack by President Trump.
Doug Ford's fury was immediate. He spoke of protecting Brampton jobs, defending Ontario's workers, and investing billions into infrastructure, critical minerals, and nuclear energy to secure the province's future. His message was political, but also personal. Ontario will not be a bystander in America's industrial game. Prime Minister Mark Carney, meanwhile, took the opposite route. He rejected calls for retaliation, urging calm and dialogue. To him, now is the time to talk, not to hit back. Ottawa's calculation is clear: avoid escalation before the 2026 USMCA review and quietly prepare long-term leverage. That divide, Ford's populist defiance versus Carney's technocratic restraint, mirrors the larger debate within Canada: fight or wait. Yet beneath the difference in tone lies a shared conclusion. The trade environment built over decades is no longer reliable. The same tariffs that were meant to revive American manufacturing have begun to unravel continental trust. While Trump celebrated reshoring as a triumph, Canada's provinces began pivoting toward independence. Nova Scotia lifted its ban on uranium exploration. Ontario accelerated funding for lithium and rare earth projects. In silence, Canada is building the next supply chain, one that can survive without Washington's permission. So far, Ottawa has chosen diplomacy. But if the White House keeps pushing, Canada is not without leverage. The first card is targeted tariffs. Canada could raise import duties on U.S. steel, agricultural goods, or pharmaceuticals, sectors with powerful political constituencies in Midwestern states. It has used this approach before. In 2018, retaliatory duties worth $16.6 billion pressured Congress to ease earlier metal tariffs. The second is resource leverage. The United States relies on Canada for more than 60% of its imported uranium, a third of its aluminum, and almost all of its hydroelectric power from cross-border grids. Restricting or repricing those exports would send shockwaves through U.S. manufacturing and energy markets. The third card is legal and diplomatic escalation. Canada could challenge Washington under USMCA's dispute settlement mechanism or at the WTO, arguing that unilateral tariffs violate agreed trade terms. Even if those cases take years, the threat alone raises uncertainty for American investors. And finally, diversification. Carney's government is already expanding negotiations with Asia and Europe. A trade pivot toward the EU, ASEAN, or India would dilute U.S. influence and give Canada alternative buyers for its critical minerals and EV components. Each option carries risk, but together they form a clear message. Economic power in North America no longer flows in one direction. For Trump, what was meant as a weapon to restore dominance could soon erode it. If allies like Canada begin decoupling supply chains, American producers will face higher costs, fewer partners, and growing isolation in markets they once controlled. From Brampton's quiet assembly lines to the corridors of Washington, this story is about more than one factory. It is the collision of two strategies: protectionism versus partnership, and the heavy cost of choosing the former. Doug Ford's defiance struck a chord, because it expressed what many Canadians feel: frustration that loyalty to cross-border trade has been met with tariffs and uncertainty. Mark Carney's patience, on the other hand, reflects the reality that Canada must navigate a superpower storm with strategy, not emotion. Yet together they reveal the same truth: when one partner turns inward, the other must adapt outward. For decades, the auto industry symbolized integration between the US and Canada. Parts built in Windsor, engines in Michigan, vehicles assembled across the border. Now that symbol has fractured. The irony is unmistakable. Trump's tariff crusade, meant to restore control, has ignited a new wave of independence right next door. The factory may move south, but the lesson travels north. In a global economy, walls built to protect can end up trapping those who build them. As the lights dim at Brampton's Jeep plant, Ford's words still echo, not as anger, but as a warning. If America keeps closing doors, Canada will learn to build its own.
We've taken in trillions of dollars. And by the way, all these countries signed agreements, as an example. They're all happy. Everybody's happy.
It's not a win for anybody. It's a miserable deal.
Time has already delivered its verdict. The tariffs launched by President Trump were supposed to revive American industry and bring in waves of foreign investment. Instead, even though a few trade deals have been signed, the evidence already shows the opposite.
Well, back in July, Seoul and Washington shook hands on a framework deal. South Korea would channel $350 billion in investment into the U.S., and in return, the U.S. would roll back some of its tariffs on Korean goods. But the deal isn't signed. Why?
And I think more generally, the commitment on the EU side to invest in the U.S. Manufacturing economy, very hard to see how that can happen.
The U.S. economy has not gained strength from these measures, and the promise of massive new capital has not materialized. From South Korea to Europe, announcements of hundreds of billions of dollars in investment remain stuck on paper. And most recently, a raid in Georgia has cast an even darker shadow over America's reputation as a safe place to invest. If allies and partners hesitate, if they question whether their workers will be welcomed or handcuffed, who will still risk putting money into the United States?
Add to this the recent storm, the Georgia raid. Over 300 South Korean workers were detained on immigration grounds. That has added fear among Korean companies.
The shock in South Korea is still fresh. In early September, more than 300 engineers and technicians from Hyundai and LG were detained in an immigration raid at a plant under construction in Georgia. They were flown back home on a special charter flight, and not a single one was charged with a crime. For families in Seoul, it was a humiliating moment. For executives in both companies, it was a warning that the U.S. may not be a reliable partner for large-scale projects. This came at the worst possible time. Just weeks earlier, Washington and Seoul had announced a framework where tariffs on Korean exports could be capped at 15% if South Korea delivered a $350 billion investment package. But the deal has stalled. The Korean president publicly warned that without a currency swap, such a transfer could destabilize his entire economy, even triggering a crisis like the one in 1997. The message is clear. Unless the U.S. provides financial guarantees and restores trust, that money will not flow. Instead of opening the door to investment, tariffs and raids have created hesitation. Europe offers another case where the promise has not matched reality. In September, Washington and Brussels celebrated a deal that capped tariffs at 15% and included an announcement of $600 billion in European investment by 2029. But the number is aspirational.
Not clear at all how the EU will be able to buy more energy from the USA, whether and how it will invest more in US manufacturing.
The European Union can sign agreements, yet the actual capital must come from individual governments and companies. No one has explained who will contribute, when funds will be released, or how they will be distributed. Public opinion polls across the continent show strong skepticism. Many Europeans question why they should send capital abroad when their own economies are struggling.
What looks like a triumph on paper remains uncertain in practice. Canada, by contrast, has chosen a different path. Ottawa has not rushed to sign a deal with Washington. Instead, it is concentrated on nation-building projects. From critical minerals and energy infrastructure to port expansions and housing programs, the Canadian government is presenting itself as a stable destination for long-term capital. At a time when U.S. policies generate uncertainty, Canada is positioning itself to become a safer place for investors in North America. The contrast is striking. While Europe and South Korea hesitate, Canada is showing that caution and domestic focus can be more attractive than flashy but risky promises. Taken together, these examples lead to one conclusion: Trump's tariff policy has backfired. The numbers look impressive when announced, but they do not translate into real dollars on American soil. Instead of strengthening U.S. industry, the approach has fueled anxiety among partners and slowed the flow of foreign direct investment. Independent economic research published in mid-2025 confirmed that reciprocal tariffs reduce U.S. growth, increase inflation, and push capital away from the country. When that is combined with immigration raids on allied workers and financial demands that partners see as destabilizing, the result is predictable. The lesson is that tariffs can create headlines, but they cannot create trust. Without trust, the hundreds of billions in promised investment will not arrive. And without that capital, America risks falling behind, even as its closest neighbors prepare to take the lead.